today. It is an honour to be part of this conversation. So as I thought a little bit about what I wanted to talk to when I became known that I was joining you, I hunted high and low for this. This is a card that I have a habit of walking away from the mic. This is a card that I received more than 10 years ago. And it represents everything that for me derives around progress. It represents, of course, the roles, the qualifications, the processes, but more than anything, it represents the people. The people who saw the opportunity, the people that gave me and shared their wisdom, the people that supported me and mentored me and sponsored me on my way. The people that saw the opportunities and gave those to me before I knew that I was even ready. And as a mother to two young children, Mia and Chloe, they're 6 and 8, I think about this often now. I think about the fact that I hope they have people in their corner as they grow through. I think about the fact that I hope they build to support the next generation. And I think about my role, which I see more and more so now, as building the right foundations to pass the baton for that next generation. And so I ask myself this question: how do we build better? As I reflected on a little bit on what I wanted to cover today, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this, my hope was that I could share some snippets of wisdom with you. My hope was also, more than anything, that you never feel alone in your own journey. Now, Julian spoke earlier about this moment of just enormous technological inflection. I don't think in my lifetime I've ever seen anything quite like it. And it is changing work life as we know it. It is changing how we move and how we play. And of course, Arm, being a semiconductor company, we are right at the nexus point in this. But we also know that the gap still remains. And in fact, our early speakers have already talked much to this. There is a gap around female representation. I'm a big believer that that is going to be a marathon, not a sprint. It's systemic, it will take time, and we are making extraordinary progress along the way. But I'm also a big believer that in times of significant change, including technological shifts, opportunities will arise. And so I ask you, when those openings come, are you ready to step forwards? So I've assembled some learnings, some reflections. Now take what you will from them. I'm going to take us way back to the very beginnings of my career, because actually many of the learnings that I've had along the way, I have carried for more than 2 decades. I have deployed those very same things that I learned when I was 21, and I still use them today. So I've tried to grab a few of these. Don't worry, we're not going to do a full CV run through. We're going to bounce around a little bit between the different things that I've done. But I want to start with this: courage. Because whenever I think about this, I reflect on when I first arrived in the city. I was actually there this weekend on a speedboat, one of those rocket boats going up the Thames. And I went past Canary Wharf and I looked up and I saw the same building I was in when I was 21 years old as a graduate. I used to sit on the 21st floor, my first experience in London, and I can tell you this, that in its own right is overwhelming. You walk into those offices, I was in banking at the time, very traditional sector at the time. I'm sure it's changed a great deal since. And I remember this moment where I was up on the 21st floor. I was a people partner to some very senior executives in the business bank. And I was stood outside the door of one of these executive offices and I was hesitating. I think I even did a few walk-bys that office because I couldn't quite get up the courage to go in. But I was hesitating on this door handle. Do I go in? Do I not? And when I get on the other side, am I going to actually find my voice? And am I going to be able to say what I want to say? And because the person on the other side was someone that had more experience than me, more qualifications than me, and frankly, more confidence than me. And we've already heard this word used today. The long and short of it was I didn't feel that I belonged. And so I had a choice. Do I step over the precipice or do I not? Do I step back? And of course I stepped in. And what did I learn? I learned that confidence rarely arrives before the action. It normally arrives following it. And in that moment, I derived a value that I have carried with me for the entire time. And we're now talking more than 2 decades on. And that is that I never put anyone above me. I never put anyone below me in my mindset. And I always carry the greatest respect. And in those moments where I find myself in hesitation, that mindset is what's carried me forwards to find my voice. I then moved on and I arrived in FMCG, very, very different business, B2C, marketing led. And I had some early lessons. I would say 1 or 2 mistakes were made, a few fingers burnt along the way, but I had some early lessons in relationship building, something that's extraordinarily close to my heart. Now, I did a range of roles there, but one of the roles I found myself in was my first international job. It was a European job. Similarly, I was working across multiple regions. I was doing a technology large-scale change program in many parts of Europe. And after a couple of months doing this job, I was based in London, I couldn't understand why things were just not moving as fast as I might liked. And I was, one might say, I was starting to become impatient. Why aren't things happening? Why isn't it moving quickly? So I went and I had a chat to 2 of the HR directors. I can remember the moment very well as if it was yesterday. And I chatted to them about kind of what was happening in this change program and why was it not moving fast enough. And they gave me some of the best advice of my career. They basically said to me, you need to get on a plane, look in the whites of the eyes. You need to listen, not with your ears. Of course, yes, listen, but with your senses and with your eyes. Come, learn, understand about the people around you. Be curious, learn their culture, understand what matters to them. That is where you're going to be able to work through and with others to get change delivered. And that is what I did. And lo and behold, 3 months, 6 months later, change program moving along beautifully. I would say I was more integrated in Europe at that point than I was in the UK. I spent the best part of my time visiting those countries, but it was phenomenally successful. And it was my first real experience of the importance of building relationships to work through and with others. Now, catapult myself into my gig after that, which was Arm. I'm a boomeranger, so I've come back to Arm, and I'll talk a little bit about that in short order. Arm taught me a great deal about progressive organisations. It's a phenomenally relational community. There's a great deal of humanity in our culture. That's very, very meaningful to us. When I arrived at Arm the first time, there was this moment where kind of someone said to me, you know, you've got a few corporate edges. And I couldn't quite understand what they meant. I said, what do you mean by corporate edges? And I quite quickly realised that in those relationships, I'd been brought up in a very formal environment and big city corporate. In those environments at the time, there wasn't much space to really bring your full self skillfully to work. You know, I had an element of a veneer that was kind of placed over me. And one could say I calibrated how much of myself I let in. Arm was joyful because Arm basically said to me, do you know what? You're going to achieve better outcomes if people can get to know you as you. And that was the first becoming of me, just chipping away some of those edges and really having a go at just bringing me into the workplace, my personality, what's important to me, the things I do at weekends, my kids. And I discovered again that produced better outcomes. So what's the lesson learned? Invariably, people support what they co-create. People want and feel fulfilled by having a vested interest. And relationship building is not a soft skill. Relationship building invariably is how complex work gets done. Range. I'm only briefly going to touch on range. Range for me is most pervasively learned at Arm. When I think about this environment that I exist in here, phenomenally high velocity, things are moving at the most incredible pace, we've got lots of change, very execution orientated. Now, I used to say to people, you need to lead from the front. Now, it's not that I don't believe that to be true. There is an element of that. But I've changed my view on that over the years, being in the work. And what I now believe is, no, you need to lead from the centre, not just from the front, not from the sidelines, but you need to be able to zoom out and you need to be able to zoom in this environment, which is moving so quickly. You need to be able to be, yes, a coach, but a player too amongst that team. And that, for me, has carried me forwards in terms of how I lead teams. That's how I derive engagement. And when the chips are down, honestly, when things get tough and you're in headwinds, it can make the biggest difference in terms of how supported a community or a team feels. It's a part of situational leadership, yes, but always has to be done from within. Brand. I want to touch briefly on brand, and I've got one more point to make after that. Brand is sometimes a bit of an uncomfortable topic for people. I began thinking about this when I arrived in that FMCG business way back when, B2C, just so marketing-led, physical products on shelves. It was Heinz, right? So we all buy beans and ketchup and all the yummies that come with that. And I got to thinking a little bit about kind of how I, in that case, represent my brand into the environment in which I exist. And I began to see this correlation between the more I focused on amplifying my strengths, which I'll tell you a little bit about in a minute in terms of the evolution of those, but which at the time were my ability to move at pace. I loved change and leading change and complexity of it and playmaking and orchestrating. And actually, I just found the more I found myself in these positions where I could amplify that and deploy that, the better the outcomes were and the better known I became for those things. It was like a self-fulfilling flywheel. And so I've thought a lot about brand over the years, and brand's an interesting one because it doesn't stay static. Brand is evolutionary. So it's not a one-time thing. It takes deep self-awareness. I'd encourage you all to reflect on what you want to amplify, but also reflect on how that might change through the eras. What might be different as you go through your career? And what are the things that are important to you that you want others to know about you? And really invest in bringing those to life. But the one thing that I definitively learned in this brand building exercise is it's intentionality. And Gillian spoke earlier, said you've got to put yourself in, you've got to put yourself forward. And the same is true in terms of what do you want to amplify? Think about it, and then find yourself the right spaces where you can bring your absolute best self to the work. Final one, adaptability. And I'm going to ground myself in the here and now in this beautiful story that is Arm. So as you know, I've said I've done one stint at Arm. I was away for a bit and I recently boomeranged back. Now, it could well be a risk to me that in boomeranging back, I assumed that all was going to be the same. In fact, when I boomeranged back to Arm, there were foundations, the DNA was the same, but so much had changed. The strategy, aspects of the culture, many of the people, just frankly, the public platform and the size and scale and reach of this company that we exist in today was different. And it's that old adage that, what got you here doesn't get you there. And I guess in part, my beginnings of my learning in boomerang back to Arm is the effort in actually unlearning some stuff. A lot of what it takes to progress is knowing what you have to let go of on the way, what needs to be different about how you skill yourself, how you evolve your experience, and how you bring yourself to the work. Because invariably these things are not always the same. And I certainly have had that learning here. I've had a huge amount of unlearning. I've had also a huge amount of relearning on arrival, relearning of what feels like an extraordinarily different business in many ways. But I've also been acutely aware on the entire journey of my learning curve of what I call this plateau. So we all recognize that moment where you go up this deep, steep learning curve and then you get to the top of it and then it sort of starts to tip. And then sometimes you find yourself in this plateau, and some people might describe it as a bit of stagnation, right? You feel a bit sort of itchy. I feel like I need something different. I'm not quite sure I'm picking up anything new. I've always managed my career within that space of avoiding the plateau. And actually, I was reflecting on where I am in the here and now. Now, I'm definitely nowhere near the plateau. I'm learning almost every single day. But I was reflecting on recent examples of my fear of normalization around the people agenda and how I am going to try and keep myself and us relevant. Good examples. I'm often found now at the dead of night in GPT having a go at using codecs or agents or building some stuff of my own for the first time, because I believe that that's going to be what the future of my function holds. And I guess in part what I'm saying is really this: we all know that getting outside your comfort zone matters. And I never believed that to be more true than now. We are all going to have to learn to work in new and different ways. We are all going to have to find points of differential where we might feel slightly on the edge of the seat, which invariably I feel every single day. But that's the joy and the fun of it. And the great news is, I mean, I look across the room here to so many fantastic people. What a community. What a network of support to help us on that path. So I'm going to draw us to a close. I mean, undoubtedly, technology will continue to evolve. But I've always said this, and I will continue to say this: humanity remains our edge. I am a fundamental believer that it is the sparkle of human potential that will continue to be the multiplier for us. And my ask would be, continue to invest within yourselves. Progress has always been a collective effort. To change the shape of the context for the generations that come will take all of us. So I'd ask you to think about this question, and I'm going to leave this with you. How do we build better for ourselves, but also for those that follow? Thank you.